Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the council meeting for the 10th of November 2021. And to start our meeting, could I ask Councillor Kedu please to welcome us? Thank you.
Kia ora koutou katoa, kei te hui mai tātou kei rau te korowai o te atua. Nō reire, tēnā koutou. Tēnā koutou e te tātou rangatira, hei ngui a tātou, ki te tiaki mai tō tātou kōrero wānanga e whāne ki te ngā kōrero i te rānei. Nō reira e te rangatira, tēnā koe, kaimahi o te rohi nei, tēnā koutou, councillors, and ki ngā tangata hapuri kei muri rā, tēnā koutou, kia tātou katoa, te whai o tō tātou reke uhikurati, me te aro o te atua, me te whiwhinga teitanga ki te wairu tapu, ake. Amen. Kia ora koutou.
Kia ora, thank you. So welcome to councillors, welcome to Deputy Chair of the Foxton Community Board, staff, members of the press that are here, those members of the public that are in the foyer, and also those watching on live stream. So, do we have any apologies? Appears not. No apologies today. Public participation, there is no items of public participation. As for the representation review, this is an option decision-making day, so there will be plenty of time for participation and consultation, whatever we decide today. On the future of the Levine Landfill, yes, because they were the only mentions of any public participation today. We do have a late item, which will be 8.5, which is the Representational Review 2021 Te Awaho Foxton Community Board Boundary Map, and we will look at that item later. It's mainly a procedural matter. Are there any declarations of interest? Councillor Jing.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just consistent with previous disclosures, just in relation to in-committee item C3, I won't be participating in that.
So noted, thank you. So we now come to confirmation of the minutes. Our minutes of council held on Wednesday the 13th of October 2021. Could I have a mover and a seconder that these are a true and correct record? Councillor Allen, Councillor Isaacs, all those in favour? Carried, thank you. Minutes of our extraordinary meeting of council held on Wednesday the 20th of October. Do I have a mover and seconder, please, that these are a true and correct record? Councillor Allen and Councillor Mitchell, all those in favour? Against, carried, thank you. So we now move, any announcements? Councillor Jennings.
Just a question, Mr. Mayor, may not be in the right place of the in the agenda, but I understand there was a pre-meeting prior to this this meeting, and I was just wondering if you could just take us through who was present at that meeting and what was discussed.
As usual, before any council meeting, there is a pre-briefing in terms of how the meeting and the items of agenda that will be coming up. That includes the Chief Executive, myself and the Deputy Mayor, plus the Democracy Support Team, and in this instance, Mr. Morrison from Morrison Solutions.
Can I just clarify then, was strategy discussed about how this meeting would be undertaken?
That was going to be an item that I will address shortly as to the process that we will undertake this meeting, yes. Just getting the procedural matters out the way first. So, proceedings of committees, and could I invite the Deputy Chair of the Foxton Community Board to present her report, please.
Good afternoon, everybody. PNCC, Wastewater Naturals Project. A drop-in session has been organised for Thursday, the 18th of November, from 4 o'clock to 7 o'clock at Te Horowhenua District. This is for the residents of Foxton and Foxton Beach to share their feelings about this project and to find out if they support the board's views. These local opinions from the residents of the lower Manawatu River will be the basis for any future consultations and submissions to PNCC throughout the consenting process. The Horowhenua Camera Trust have been invited to speak at the Foxton Community Board Foxton Tourist and Development hosted event. This is on Thursday, the 11th of November at 5 o'clock at Te Horowhenua District. The Mayor and the councillors are all invited to attend this presentation. The board requests the Holden Reserve Development. The board requests the council support the board recommendation on the Holden Reserve. That is, the upgrade of the tennis courts to a multi-use court, a double flying fox in the forested area, provisions of barbecues, shade and seating, walkway improvements with the focus in the pine forest. The board supports the council stand on the three waters and hope that council will not bow down to the dictatorship under central government's mandate. In early October, Mr Hester organised a community planting day in the sand dunes. 3,500 spinifex were planted by about 30 people. A special thanks to Mr Hester and the staff for organising a fun and productive day, and to Mayor Burney for supporting Foxton and joining our group of volunteers. The worry is now, how do we keep these vehicles off the plants in the sandhills? On behalf of the board and myself, I would like to thank Mr Caperton for his support of the board and the projects in the board's area, and also his support for our community and their endeavours over the past years. Mr Caperton, we wish you well for the future. Thank you. I'm a bit scared to ask any questions because I think
Thank you. Any questions of Trish? Deputy Mayor Mason.
Thank you, Mayor Burney, and this may be a question for officers. It's in relation to the report that's before us, and I had made this aware to councillors, and I think that members from Foxton might want to speak to this as well. It's in relation to the recommendations in terms of the expenditure for the money from the Foxton Beach freeholding account for the upgrade of the tennis courts to multi-use double flying fox shelters and walkway improvements. I know when we talked in the long-term plan there was a big discussion around wetland and water improvement for that area. So my question was, in this process, was there any priority given to the improvements to the water quality, starting the wetland work? And for this sum of money, $700,000, what could be achieved in this area? And then my next question was, I've not seen anything in relation to a flying fox before, and was curious about the officer's report that talks about potential ongoing costs, the potential for vandalism because of its location. I wondered what its proximity is to the Ramsar site, and with the noise, if it was, going to create a noise issue for the bird habitat there in that Ramsar site. And then my next question was, how old are the pine trees that it's planned to be in, and are there any viability issues or issues around those trees? So that's quite a lot of questions, sorry.
Deputy Mayor Mason, we haven't quite put that recommendation on the table yet, so when it does, we'll get the officers to come forward as well, and they may be able to expand on some of those things. So keep your question in mind. Can I first move 2.1 and 2.2 of page 7, that the report be received and that we also receive the minutes of the Foxton Community Board held on the 18th of October 2021. Moved Councillor Brannigan, seconded Councillor Allen. All those in favour? Against? Carried. So, we do have a 2.3 recommendation. that the Horowhenua District Council agrees for council officers to proceed with the top 4 recreational improvements for Holden Reserve, with works to be completed during the 2021-22 financial year and to not exceed the total budget of $700,000. So we have a report on page 9, and if officers are ready to come to the table to talk to that first, I would welcome them. Welcome, Arthur. Welcome, Stefan. It's in your hands. No, try the other one. Yeah, we unfortunately, because of live streaming, we do need the microphones on. Thank you.
So thanks to your worship and the councillors for asking us to come forward and just talk about this. In relation to the queries that Councillor Mason has made, initially, yes, there was quite a substantial proposal to create a wetland. Part and parcel of that is we applied or we looked at the eastern side of the Holden Reserve. There's actually 2 gullies that bring wastewater down, or not wastewater, sorry, stormwater down, before they move into the Holden Reserve Park, the developed area. We initially, on the understanding that we were perhaps going to get the freshwater funding, considered that the initial 700k would be utilised to as a sort of as our contribution to that application for the freshwater fund, and so we proposed that eastern side would be the area we dealt with in terms of improving the ecological standards and the water that went into the main area. Unfortunately, we didn't get the freshwater funding, and we subsequently didn't get any funding for via the long-term plan for that entire area. And one section of the wetland would not necessarily significantly improve the water quality on the other side of the park in the developed area. So it probably 20-30%, but it wouldn't achieve the outcomes we initially envisaged we were going to get, which is bringing it to ANZAC 2000 standard. So the initial proposal was for the east side, but clearly when things didn't turn out as we hoped they would turn out, then we had to look at other options, and some of those other options we were requested to consider via FCB. And that's essentially where the report comes from, related to the document you've got in front of you. In the first one. The second one, the question was around the Flying Fox. The Flying Fox actually goes back to the initial 2015 investment plan. It was one of the higher rated requests from residents in 2015. It's just we never had the time or money to implement it. So it is an outstanding, significant request from that community up there. When we rated these, we rated them from 1 to 10. 9 being the highest. The Flying Fox had a rating of 9, as did a fair amount of the work we were going to do on improving the wetland. So it is something that goes back to 2015. In terms of noise, we don't anticipate there's going to be any significant increases in noise that would be a problem to the Ramsar site. It's already a pretty well used site at any rate. Does that answer your question? Pardon?
How old are the pine trees, and is there any perceived sort of risk because they only have a certain lifespan, or like what's the risk around the pine trees and the age of them?
Part and parcel of the Flying Fox installation is to do a fair amount of tree works to reduce any issues relating to the pine tree area. So yes, they are quite old trees, but we will be people are already walking through there. We will just be making sure that we ensure, particularly for the Flying Fox, that any issues are dealt with prior to the installation.
Councillor Mitchell.
So would you have any idea about the ongoing maintenance costs and possible having to fix up of this vandalism? In the report, it definitely sort of talks about quite high ongoing costs. And would they come from the Foxton freeholding budget, or would they come from the general parks budget?
Really depends on the magnitude of the costs. Certainly when we put in new features, there is an increase on maintenance. We try and manage those as we can in the existing budgets. I don't anticipate necessarily that we would need to come back to council for any additional money for a flying fox that we put up in Holden Reserve. I think we'd probably cope with that in our existing budgets.
So just to note, maintenance costs can't come from the freeholding account, and capital costs.
Councillor Mitchell.
So I'm just curious, like in a marine environment, which is basically a lot of salt spray in the air there, and you have wire ropes for flying foxes, what's the lifespan likely to be for a flying fox in that sort of environment?
I've got to be quite honest, Councillor Mitchell, I don't think we've got that detail at this point. We can certainly clarify that and obviously come back to you and give you an idea of that. But obviously, when we propose this, then whoever we propose it to, we'll be raising those sort of issues with them as well. And as I say, this is essentially the initial proposal. Clearly, if we go back and our advice is that it's not possible to be done, or there's some significant issue with it, then obviously we'll bring that back to FCB if it's necessary. But I wouldn't necessarily think it's going to be a huge problem. But like I said, we haven't done that degree of investigation at this point.
Deputy Mayor Mason.
Thank you for indulging me with one more question. Are there any plans to continue with applications for funds around that wetland? Where does that sit now?
We'd certainly be looking for any funding we could get. I think the issue is that that funding was specifically for wetlands and freshwater improvement funds. There is no longer an improvement fund for that specifically. It's part of a bigger budget. So in some respects, our best shot might have receded, but that won't stop us looking for options where we might be able to get additional funding for that sort of work. So we will continue to check. We will continue to look at what we can do.
Councillor Brannigan.
Yeah, probably not a question, but more of a comment, if that you allow. Or they can come after.
It probably can come after. Yep. Councillor Tipper.
I think I heard you say that your analysis or report came of the direction from Foxton Community Board around not doing the wetland versus the other items, or changing the priority, or did I hear that right?
It's probably more the fact that we had a particular way we were going to program this in, obviously. If you go back to the 2015 document, water quality was quite an important issue for them, but the fact that we didn't actually get the funding, we can't really make a significant change to the water quality that's going through that area and into the park. So we can, if we were to do the freshwater wetland on the eastern side, it wouldn't massively impact the overall quality of water going into the park itself. You need to do the full thing because it comes down to 2 channels over there. In terms of the direction, yes, initially we did go back talking about the eastern side, but clearly when some of those other things didn't eventuate, there was a clear eye out and clear interest from FCB, which looked at how putting something in that would make some significant or a higher impact and be, of more use to the community in that respect. And certainly the areas that have been identified, there are problems with the tennis courts and other areas. They do need an upgrade. So essentially, we didn't get where we wanted to with this funding, so we're obviously looking at other alternatives, and that has to some extent been directed, or not directed is the wrong word, but a desire to do some improvements on the park itself has obviously come from FCB as well. Yes.
One
Councillor
question.
Tukapu.
Okay. So I understand that there's a 10-year program, and that the budget of 700,000 exists. Though, is it money in the bank or is that debt funded?
The funding for this reserves investment programme actually goes right back to 2015, so it's already money that was voted on in 2015 by council. It was $1 million investment for the reserves in Foxton Beach coming out of the freeholding account, so yeah, it is there.
Thank you, Arthur. Thank you, Stefan. Appreciate the work. So, recommendation, I need a mover and a seconder. Councillor Brannigan, seconded by Councillor Allen. Any further discussion or debate? Councillor Brannigan.
Yeah, thank you, Worship. Just for some context, this was debated, I think Councillor Allen will agree, and Board Member Metcalf, that it was debated quite robustly at the Community Board in terms of the environmental approach with this money left in the reserves investment account or fund, these projects you see here. And I think there were some differing views, but democracy prevails, and this was the outcome. But I think it's a wider discussion that we need to have, and I'm not sure if it's something that needs to be perhaps brought up through the next annual plan, perhaps. In terms of the projected growth of the freeholding account, and it's perhaps ring-fencing some of that money from the freeholding account to part fund a project, a stormwater approach around the Foxton Beach community. We just met with Asley earlier this afternoon, in fact, about that, some of the stormwater issues there, and an opportunity, I think, to do something really good in there. The bottom line, what it came down to is the 700,000 wasn't going to markedly make too much difference to what we were trying to achieve. So I think that, I'd like to see that approach. Not sure how we'd get to there, but I think it's just something we'd like to signal, because it is an opportunity, and the freeholding account with the projected growth and the reason the CEO has supported the investment of that fund and the growth of that fund to achieve that. So I guess we'll look at how we can put that together.
Motion's on the table. All those in favour? Against? Carried. Thank you. Moving to 7.2, sorry, the Proceedings of the Community Funding and Recognition Committee, which is to receive the report and to receive the minutes of the Community Funding and Recognition Committee meeting held on the 26th of October 2021. Can I have a mover and a seconder, please? Councillor Kay Simmons, Councillor Allen. All those in favour? Against? Thank you. So we now move to the reports of our meeting, and the intention is to deal with all the matters other than 8.4, which is the future of the Levine landfill topic first. So we will do 8.1, 8.2, 8.3, 8.5, which is the late item regarding the community board map. We will move to 9.1, 10.1, and then come back to the issue 8.4, the future of the Levine landfill, if we can get those matters out of the way. So, reports 8.1, the Mayoral Report. I'll so move. Could I have a seconder, please? Councillor Kay Simmons. All those in favour? Any items that councillors wish to? Councillor Kay Simmons.
Yeah, just briefly. on page 25 in your Mayoral Report, where you mentioned the virtual road shows, I think there were 3 in total that you'd attended virtually. Were they recorded? Were we able to go back and see those? So that's good.
They are recorded, yes.
Great, okay. And just if I could briefly add from community wellbeing, so we met yesterday and it was decided that our February 2022 meeting was going to be a workshop, and it was going to be based on the new structure and framework that the stakeholders are wanting to put forward, and the community wellbeing will report back to council at March 2022's meeting. But just as part of that meeting, we had a VAC-STAT update for the region, and the numbers basically are from November 7th, Sunday. So basically regionally, the total doses were sitting at 248,167. First doses were sitting at 133,303, which is 88%. And the second dose was 144,842, sitting at 75%. Horowhenua's first dose percentage is currently sitting at 87%, and our eligible population that are unvaccinated in the Horowhenua is currently 3,768. So this Saturday, November the 13th, clinics available are Honeymoor House from 9 till 3, Foxton Beach at Flagstaff Reserve from 9:30 to 2, and Shannon Te Waiora 10 till 2. Thanks.
Can I just add to that and acknowledge the work that especially Mapuku Tribal Authority and the Raukawa Whanauora are doing in that space. They are doing a fantastic job. And those that have volunteered and supported our community in a lot of different ways in making these events be the success that they are. And also those that have been involved in Shannon and Foxton as well have been very successful, and just like to acknowledge that. Also, I know it'll appear in my next report for November, but just wanted to let councillors know that those especially that have been around this table for a long time, that the Shannon Jail House has been located in a final resting space in Te Maori Park after many years of neglect and not happening. The Parks and Reserves people, plus the community in Foxton, Shannon, and especially the Progressive Association have got together and found a new space for it, and it looks fantastic. We had a blessing on Monday morning. It was great. Do you want to add to that at all, Robert?
Kia ora, Mayor. Yes, no, it was really a great turnout, and we were, as a community, we're looking forward to that space and developing that whole area of Te Maire. I did get an opportunity to talk about that, how special Te Maire is to our community, and how it's connected to the Manawatu River and the lagoons in the surrounding areas of significance, which are connected to the whare taiao that is on the same space. So we're looking forward to the whole development of that area. So, yeah, kia ora.
Kia ora, Robert, and can I especially acknowledge the work that Stefan from the Parks and Reserves Department put into that. He's not here any longer, but anyway. Okay, moving to the monitoring report on page 27. Can I move that the monitoring report be received? Sorry, Councillor Tukapua, did you have a question?
I was just curious about, on page 25, the meeting with Tracy Martin, what the highlights of that might have been.
So Tracy Martin is now the chair of the Wellington Regional Growth Framework Leadership Committee, and been appointed and by government in that space. So she's an independent chair. So she was just doing her background visits and seeking information on what was going on in the Horowhenua and our contribution that we could make to the Wellington Regional Growth Framework. So it was a good chat. So, moving to, as I said, the monitoring report. Could I move 2.1 and 2.2 that this report be received? Councillor Allen, seconded Councillor Brannigan. All those in favour? Against? Carried. Any items that members wish to bring or discuss? Councillor Tupapua.
Item 21/316, third bullet point, covers pages 30, 31. Can I just confirm then that based on the comment translated, that means the resolution stands and the officer comment, or the difference of it, doesn't? I was the mover and Councillor, or Deputy Mayor Joe Mason was the second.
Are you referring to the comment at the bottom of page 31 there?
Oh, you read the whole thing and then. Because the resolution is specifically in reference to Thompson House Remembrance Park, but then the comment above it said, should an appropriate site become available. So my question a few months ago, well, what is it? Is it the resolution or is it the comment? And I think after reading that reference to deliberations 26th of May, it means the resolution or decision of council stands. Yeah, so that needs to be updated.
Noted, thank you.
Just on page 28, around the draft Horowhenua Climate Action Plan, because that motion was lost at the last meeting, just wondered, the groups continue to have those discussions, so I'm assuming we aren't part of those discussions at all currently. So the groups that were part of the Climate Action Plan, so they're meeting, I think they're meeting tomorrow, but we're obviously not at that table, or is Mayor Burney at that table?
Although tomorrow being Armistice Day, there is a conflict, and so we'll not be able to be present for the whole meeting, but I will be there for the start of it. Yeah.
Thank you.
Councillor Bishop.
Item 2469 about the new manager housing and business development role. Can we have an update on where that's at, please?
If I could do that offline, I'll send an email out to councillors, just the progress that's been made on that.
I had a question.
Councillor Casons.
So do you want me to send my question through to you around the page 21, the growth dashboard and the new role for that, or? Okay, fine.
Sorry, the point being that we're going through an employment process, and it's not the place to actually discuss that here, but happy to actually update councillors.
Okay, let's move on to the Chief Executive's report to the 1st of November 2021. Can I move receipt of that report? Councillor Brannigan, Councillor Isaacs, all those in favour? Against? Carried. Any items that you wish to inquire about? Councillor Allen.
Just with reference, Mr Mayor, to the long-term plan monitoring report, I did send a suggestion through but didn't get a response that the matters pertaining to the Foxton Community Board area be included in their agendas. There are a number of them that are of, I think, real interest to the board, and so I don't know that it requires a resolution, but could I suggest that they be included on the board's agenda?
Noted. So that will go through, I think we'll work through that somehow with the democracy team, see if we can actually isolate the Foxton and Foxton Beach items out of the LTP and report to the community board.
Councillor Jennings.
Just a question on items 3.3, 3.4, which is the lighting and the Hank Edwards Reserve public toilets. Just wondering whether these items should have or will come to the project steering group or is the expected financial is the expected cost underneath the threshold for that steering group?
So my two cohorts have left the building, or left the room. I can't answer that, Councillor Jennings, but I will come back to you if I can get an answer before the end of the evening.
Can I
Yes,
just note that in the agenda it does say that they've already been put out to tender and that basically they've been accepted and when construction dates are going to happen. So I would almost think it's past our stage.
So I'll seek clarification on that.
So, sorry, and then a follow-up just question in relation to 3.4 would be just some clarity around what budget line that's coming from. Is this the public toilet renewals budget, or is there another budget that's coming from?
I'm going to make an assumption here that it comes from the public services, public toilets renewals budget, but I'll seek clarification on that as well. It's a CapEx item. Yeah.
Okay, so we've dealt with 8.1, 8.2, 8.3. We're now moving to our late item, which is 8.5, which is the Representational Review 2021 Te Awaho Foxton Community Board Boundary Map. And this has been brought about by the fact that when our proposal went to Statistics New Zealand with the new boundary map, they noticed that the map that we had included did not cover cover mesh blocks. That there were part mesh blocks, and as you are aware, when these boundaries are done, they need to be in mesh blocks. So that is why in page 2 of the report you see the new map as to how it should be. So could I first move receipt of this boundary map report? Councillor Allen, Councillor Kay Simmons, all those in favour? Against? Carried. And now 3.4, that the Horowhenua District Council adopts the Te Awaho Foxton Community Board boundaries as shown on map B. Have a mover and a second, please. Councillor Allen. Councillor Kay Simmons. And you wish to speak to it, Councillor Allen?
I believe it's a technical issue, and I support it for that reason.
Thank you. I'll put the motion. All those in favour? Against? Carried. Thank you. So now moving to customer and regulatory services, we're looking at 9.1, the policy review for Class 4 gambling venue policy and TAB venue policy. And Vi, I assume you're coming to introduce the topic and talk to it.
Kia ora koutou katoa. Ngā mihi o te ahiahi. Good afternoon, Your Worship and Councillors. The purpose of my report this afternoon is to seek Council resolution to publicly consult on the review of our gambling Class 4 venue policy and TAB venue policy. Both policies are due for review as required by legislation, so the Gambling Act and the Racing Industry Act. The contents of the review processes in the report. So I'll take the report as read and have to answer any questions.
Councillor Tukapua.
On page 61, where it's got iwi considerations, you've said you'll do a direct mail out. Can I just check that raukaua whānau ora are on that list?
I don't have the list in front of me at the moment, but if you would like them to be on the list, I can certainly consider it.
Councillor Mitchell.
And I just wondered whether, and it doesn't have to be long-winded, but if this could be added to the agenda of the hapu group that meets here monthly. Maybe.
So absolutely, we have a monthly meeting with the 13 hapu of Rakawa in the council building here, and happy to actually have that included, or I'll arrange with Vi to have that included in the next meeting, which will be early December.
Councillor Mitchell.
I'm just curious, and I don't know whether you know the answer to this question, but you talk about how our community lost 9.4 million in 1 year through gambling machines in the Horowhenua, and we only got 782,000 back in grants. So where does the profit go? Does it go to those clubs or hotels or whatever that have the gaming facilities?
Yes and no. So some of that goes back to the DIA. So there is a percentage of the proceeds that needs to go back to the Department of Internal Affairs. So once they've paid those fees, then the rest goes back to venue.
Councillor Kay Simmons.
I didn't have a question, Vi, but I was pretty much along the same lines as Christine. I was really pleased to see those figures in there, because even when some of us at this table may have worked in the hospitality industry, and it's always been really hard to find out what exactly goes out of this district. So I'm really pleased to see it in there for people to say thanks.
Thank you, Vi. So could I move 3.1 that the gambling venue policy class 4 and TAB venue policy be received? Councillor Brannigan, Councillor Allen, all those in favour? Against? Carried. Thank you. And now we have 3.3 that the Horowhenua District Council resolves that the special consultative procedure as detailed in the Local Government Act 2002 be used for consultation purposes in the review of these policies, using the statement of proposal drafted in accordance with section 83(1)(a)(1) of the Local Government Act 2002 and attached as attachment A, including the draft gambling class 4 venue policy and the draft TAB venue policy, and 2, that the summary of information as required by section 89 of the Local Government Act 2002 and attached as attachment B, confirming it to be a fair representation of the major matters in the statement of proposal, is in a form determined by council, indicates where the statement of proposal may be inspected and a copy may be obtained, and states the period within which submissions on the proposal may be made. And 3.4, that should submissions be received, that hearing of these submissions be undertaken by the Hearings Committee acting under delegated authority for a subsequent recommendation to council. Moved by Councillor Deputy Mayor Mason and seconded by Councillor Allen. Any further discussion? Councillor Allen.
Just a query, did we move 3.2, the significance policy? I'm not sure we actually moved it. But
you're quite right. So we will include 3.2, that this matter of decision is recognised as not significant in terms of section 76 of the Local Government Act. Thank you.
Deputy Mayor Mason seemed to include it. I'm happy to.
If you moved by Deputy Mayor Mason and seconded by Councillor Allen. Any further debate? I'll put the motion. All those in favour? Against? Carried. Thank you. Now moving to page 63 of our agenda, which is related to council-controlled organisation exemptions. Could I move 2.1 and 2.2 that the report be received and the matter not be recognised as significant? First moved by Councillor Allen, seconded by Councillor Bishop. All those in favour? Against? Carried. So we have 3 resolutions in front of us, 2.3, 2.4 and 2.5. 2.3, that council-controlled organisation exemption be extended to the Shannon Community Development Trust for a further 3 years from 1 July 2021 to 30th of June 2024. 2.4, that council-controlled organisation exemption be extended to the Manawatu Wanganui Local Authority Shared Services Limited, MWLAS, for a further 3 years from 1 July 2021 to 30th of June 2024. And 2.5, that council-controlled organisation exemption be extended to the Manawatu Wanganui Regional Disaster Relief Fund Trust for a further 3 years from 1 July 2021 to 30th of June 2024. Do I have a mover and a second for that, please? Councillor Brannigan, Councillor Allen is seconding. Any further discussion? Councillor Tukapua.
Oh.
You had a question? No?
Oh, sorry, I just was checking that maybe you had the answer, but anyway, I'll ask because you 2.5, I might be wrong, but I recall Tony Rush used to be a former trustee. Do we have a representative now?
Yes, that's me. I think in the 2 years that I've been in the role, it's met for one Zoom meeting that lasted about 15 minutes. This Disaster Relief Fund Trust was set up after the flooding events 2004. So it's a long-standing committee, but still is in existence in case it's needed in the future. So put the motion, all those, oh sorry, Councillor Kidd.
Just a clarification. The Shannon, did you say the community development? What was the name of that again?
The Shannon Community Development Trust.
Ah, yes. Kia ora.
Kia ora. Put the motion, all those in favour? Aye. Against? Okay, right. Did you want to?
Oh, I just had a question about our contribution to NWLAS. We didn't have anything in the report, that was it.
I don't know the figures off the top of my head, but we pay an annual fee for our participation in that group. I'm a director. I'm not a director at the moment. Deputy Chief Executive is actually director, and we pay an annual fee, and I can't remember off the top of my head what it is. It's in the tens of thousands, not rather than the hundreds of thousands.
So the motion is carried. Thank you. Okay, so we now move to, that has got rid of all our reports and other matters. We are now going to move to 8.4, the future of the Levine landfill. And our intention is to, first of all, move 3.1, 3.2, that the report for the future of the Levine landfill be received, that this matter or decision is recognised as significant in terms of Section 76 of the Local Government Act. Do I have a mover and a seconder, please? Councillor Allen, Councillor Kay Simmons, all those in favour? Against? Carried. So we have with us to introduce this topic, the Chief Executive and Mr Morrison from Morrison Solutions, who you all know is the consultant that we have been engaged with through this process. So welcome, Malcolm. And David, you wish to start the proceedings?
Thank you, Your Worship. Okay, I'll stand back a bit. So the first thing I'd just like to note is just a correction on the report, which is on page 55, under the next steps, second bullet point. It's not controlled waste is being disposed of at the Levine landfill, it's actually at the Bonnie landfill. So that's just a correction that needs to be made. Right, so just as an introduction to this report. In 2019, the Levine Landfill Agreement was signed between Council and community representatives to conclude the review of the five-yearly review of the Levine Landfill Resource Consent Conditions. The Levine Landfill Agreement agreed to a formal review of the Levine Landfill closure date and the establishment of a project management group that would have input into decisions on the future of the landfill. The process to determine that closure date for the Levine landfill included the Chief Executive recommendation to the closure date for the landfill at the latest 31st of December 2025. In terms of the recommendation to close the landfill early, Council commissioned Morrison Solutions to prepare a business case. An effective business case, particularly when considering the future of this significant asset, is part of a council's governance process that is both responsible and accountable for the final decision on the future of the Levine landfill. It also follows the framework of Treasury's Better Business Case process, and this gives you comfort that it complies with recognised best practice for public institutions. The business case produced by Morrison Solution is, in my opinion, of very high quality. I believe elected members and members of the public can be assured that a high level of independent expertise has been applied in preparing the business case. The business case is rigorous analysis supported by verifiable data and evidence-based assumptions. It has considered a wide range of qualitative and quantitative factors, including the wellbeing and financial assessment for each option considered, along with risk evaluations for each option. A range of options were considered for the business case, and following a workshop with Council, 3 were shortlisted. Close the landfill in 2022, closure of the landfill in 2025, keep the landfill operating until it is full or its consent expires in 2037. For each of the business case options, a wellbeing and financial assessment was completed, along with a risk evaluation for each option. Benefits and risks for each of the options were well traversed and articulated in the business case. For each of the options, Morrison Solutions has considered using a multi-criteria approach and has recommended that HDC close the Levine landfill in 2022, as this produces the best outcomes to Council from a strategic, financial, wellbeing and risk perspective. Like elected members, I've considered the business case and the recommendation Morrison Solutions has made to Council. Whilst my obligation under the Levine Landfill Agreement is to recommend to Council that the Levine landfill closes before December 2025, my recommendation to Council today, based on the robust, rigorous and broad assessment Morrison Solutions has covered in the business case, is that the Levine landfill be closed in 2022.
Thank you. Malcolm, is there anything that you wish to add, or is Tessa online as well? Is there anything that she wishes to add?
So through you, Your Worship, the intention now is to do have Morrison Solution do a presentation. So we're hoping to get on screen Tessa McGregor, who unfortunately is locked in Auckland. She has been for the last 84 days, I think it is. So between Tessa and Malcolm, they will do a presentation to Council. And we've also got Nick Nick from Bill. He will be doing a short presentation as well for the on the wellbeing framework. Thank you, Mr. Mayor and Chief Executive. It's a pleasure to meet you all again today. We have Tessa on Zoom and Nick, and as David said, Tessa's been closed down for 84 days, but I know she tells me it's 84 weeks in reality, having to look after her children. Anyway, we've taken some time to do this report, and we intend to go through it at a reasonably high level. The report itself is quite long, as the councillors will know from reading it, and with the additions of the Bill report in it as well, it's getting on for 200 pages, I would say. To enable a high-level understanding for the public especially, we have made a very consolidated report, which Tessa will take us through now. And I'd ask her to make a start if you can get it up on the screen, Tessa.
Great, thank you everybody. I'm hoping that my screen is now being shared with you all.
Yep, it's fine.
Great.
So can someone just turn your mic on at the top, please?
So as Malcolm said, today we'll be presenting an overview of our findings from the work we've been doing on the business case for the future of the Levine landfill. And our report is quite extensive, but to enable members of the public to have an understanding of the analysis, we'll present a condensed version today. Some parts are commercially sensitive, but the areas that can be discussed will be. So what we'll do is we'll just run through the process that we've been through to date, our recommendation, a little bit about the performance of the landfill and some regional and national initiatives, a description of the options, and then the wellbeing and financial assessment. So first of all, I'm sure you're all aware the landfill is on Horowhenua Beach Road between Horowhenua Beach and Levine. The new landfills and old landfill are side by side on the same site and covered by the same resource consents. And we've got Horowhenua Stream running to the north of Horowhenua Beach Road past the landfill between Lake Horowhenua and the sea. So the old landfill was operating from the 1950s and was unlined on the sand dunes. The new landfill commenced operations in 2004 and was consented through the Resource Management Act process with an engineered liner. The resource consent conditions that were put in place include a 5-yearly review, and at this point, Horizons Regional Council can conduct a full review of all conditions and set those for the next 5 years. It would be fair to say that there has been ongoing community concern regarding the landfill, and the 2016 review took 3.5 years to complete. The revised consent conditions were appealed through to the Environment Court, and this was resolved in 2019 by the signing of the landfill agreement with a number of parties, including HECA and Ngāti Pararaukawa. And the landfill agreement was intended to form a partnership model to avoid litigation going forward. And one of the key parts of the landfill agreement was this formal review of the closure date of the Levine landfill. And the CEO must recommend, through the landfill agreement, must recommend a closure date of no later than the 31st of December 2025. And that has been complied with today through his report. However, the landfill agreement also clearly states that HDC councillors must decide on the closure date of the Levine landfill, and that must take into account all the statutory requirements, including the Local Government Act. If the Levine landfill remains open beyond 2025, the landfill agreement will terminate and the parties can take whatever action they see fit following this. The resource consent review process will happen again in 2024, 2029 and 2034, regardless of the closure date. And if the closure date is before December 2025, there's a number of other parts to the landfill agreement that will come into effect, including the leachate cessation or reduction option, the development of a closure and remediation plan, and a reconciliation process, including an apology from HDC. So this figure just sets out the process for the closure review. The purple boxes are the items that are set out in the landfill agreement, and the red boxes are additional reports that have been commissioned by HDC. So the technical review of the closure dates has been completed by Tonkin and Taylor, and a social impact assessment has been completed by Bronwyn Kerr. Cultural impact assessments have been commissioned from Ngāti Pararaukawa and Moapoko. The recommendation for the landfill closure date has been made by the PMG, and that all comes through into the officer's report and recommendation. In addition, Burl has completed a wellbeing assessment and Stantec a financial assessment, and those have all been considered in the business case that we've compiled together. HDC councillors will decide on their preferred closure date, following which all the statutory requirements, including likely a special consultative process, will need to be complied with. So just very briefly on our business case, as the CEO has noted, this follows Treasury's Better Business Case framework, which is designed to help public sector organisations analyse problems with many different factors to consider. And the 5 key parameters that you look at through the multi-criteria analysis are the strategic fit, the wellbeing analysis, financial analysis, commercial implications, and the implementation considerations. Key information from this report will be made available through the consultation process. Regarding the options that were considered through the business case, 5 options were considered and the following 3 were shortlisted. Firstly, closure of the landfill in 2022 and disposal of HDC waste at another disposal site. Secondly, closure in 2025 and HDC's waste being disposed elsewhere after that date, but continuing operations between now and then. And finally, option 3, which would see the landfill closed either in 2037 when the consents expire or sooner if the capacity is reached. And throughout this period, there'll be the ongoing resource consent review points. In terms of our recommendation, in our independent opinion, the recommended option is for closure of the Levine landfill in 2022, which is option 1. This is because it provides the best outcome for council from a strategic, financial and wellbeing perspective in a much lower risk environment. And I'll just briefly touch on that. On this slide here, we've shown a high-level assessment using a traffic light system. And these show the key considerations that we've based our analysis on. So firstly, from a strategic alignment perspective, option 1 provides the best alignment with HDC's waste minimisation objectives. We then have the 4 wellbeings as defined by the Local Government Act. And from a cultural, social and environmental perspective, closure in 2022 provides the best outcome. From an economic perspective, either option 1 or option 3 could provide the best outcome. And that's based on balancing the cost to council with the creation of additional jobs within the district. The financial analysis concluded that option 1 was the preferred option financially in most scenarios. However, in some of the scenarios that we looked at, option 3 was the preferred option. And finally, we looked at risk from a financial, commercial, consenting and environmental perspective and concluded that option 1 provided the lowest risk to HDC. So I'll just really briefly go through some of the background information that we used. And on the right of the slide, you can see the composition of HDC controlled waste, which shows that the majority of waste comes from the Foxton and Shannon transfer stations and parks in general. And there's a small proportion of curbside tonnes and sewage sludge from the Levine wastewater treatment plant. This could look quite different by 2026 as council's contracts come to an end and the sewage sludge potentially being the responsibility of a new Three Waters entity. In terms of what might happen to waste volumes in future, council's waste minimisation and management plan proposes investigation of curbside food and green waste collections. And this is something that could be mandated by the government with their proposal to ban food and green waste to landfill by 2030. There's a number of other initiatives in the waste management and in the waste minimisation and management plan. And the changes in potential future volume have been considered through the business case process. In general, it'd be fair to say that you could expect waste volumes to landfill to go down in future. Looking more broadly at the total waste in the district and the waste disposed of at the Levine landfill, the estimated total waste at the moment is 660 kilograms per person, which is substantially higher than the target of 400 kilograms per person. However, there's definitely some data quality issues that have been recognised at a national level, and these are being addressed through the National Waste Data Framework implementation and locally through the updating of HDC's solid waste bylaw. And I think in future you'll have much better information about the waste that actually is generated throughout the district. From a historical consent compliance perspective, the landfill has a number of consents, and the one that has received the significant non-compliance on 3 occasions in the past 4 years is the one regarding the discharge of landfill gas, odour and dust to air. The information from before 2017 is harder to compare in this way because of the way that it was reported through Horizons from that time. But in terms of the 3 significant non-compliances that you can see here, the first 2 from 2017 related to the discharge of odour beyond the site boundary, and the more recent one from 2020 related to the fact that monthly methane monitoring wasn't being carried out as required as one of the new resource consent conditions. Just to touch briefly on 3 environmental considerations, the first being leachate. So Tonkin and Taylor were commissioned through the project management group to be the expert advisors to complete a best practicable option review for the leachate. And they concluded that the original landfill is the primary source of leachate discharge at the site. This impacts the water quality in the Tartana drain and has a minor to negligible impact on the Hokio stream. The current landfill is lined and is not thought to be a significant source of leachate discharge, as no leachate impacts can be detected down gradient from the new landfill. Closure of the current landfill, either immediately or at any date in the future, will not materially reduce the leachate entering the Tartana drain or Hokio stream. Now, regardless of this, HDC has an obligation under its resource consents and the landfill agreement to, if it's feasible, cease or materially reduce the discharge of leachate by June 2023. And the landfill agreement sets out a process that HDC must work through with the PMG to identify options and select the preferred option for remediation. The second environmental point that we'd just like to touch on is odour. And the Levine landfill over its history has been the subject of a large number of odour complaints, with significant non-compliances received as recently as 2017. There's been no verified instances of objectionable odour beyond the site boundary since 2017, but there have been numerous odour complaints over the same period, and this continues to be a source of ongoing concern for the local residents. During the 2016 consent review, the air quality experts identified 2 main sources of odour, the first being the passive discharge of landfill gas from the portions of the landfill that had not received the final cover, and the second being landfill gas from the leachate collection manhole. And my understanding is that the leachate collection manhole is now collected through to the flare, and the impact of that is likely to be less. They also noted that they didn't think the odour from the active landfill tipping area, so where the trucks tip the waste off, they said that is likely to be a minor contributor to waste. So therefore, if the Levine landfill was to close, the odour would likely reduce substantially, but potentially not entirely be eliminated. And MWH, as part of that review in 2016, noted that in certain weather conditions, the impact of odour can change, and that can have an impact on how far it spreads from the site. And then just finally, the third environmental point that I'd like to note is around the methane emissions and gas capture. And this is significant for the landfill from both an environmental and a financial perspective. And we'll just touch on both of these now. So methane is significant from a climate change perspective because it's got 25 times more powerful than carbon dioxide at trapping heat in the Earth's atmosphere. And I'm sure we're all aware that this has been a focus of recent talks at COP26, and there's the potential for further targeted action by the New Zealand government, specifically focusing on methane in the coming years. So from the point of view of landfills, the emissions are reported for each landfill via a unique emissions factor, and most large landfills will have one of these that relates to their gas capture system. It allows the landfills to measure their environmental impact in terms of their methane emissions and also to reduce their emissions trading scheme costs. Generally speaking, the large landfills are much more successful in capturing gas, and that's predominantly down to economies of scale. And to generate the ETS cost, the UEF, the unique emissions factor, is multiplied through by the ETS price, and there's been significant escalation of the ETS price in the last 12 months. And as you can see from the graph on the right, the Levine landfill is kind of a mid-performer and comparable to other landfills of its size. And just to show a comparison of how that reflects on the finances of the landfill, at the moment, the ETS units are trading at about $65 per unit. And for the Levine landfill, that means that the ETS costs, if you were to buy that unit today, would cost you $53.85, whereas they'd be about $40 for Spice's landfill or $15 for Bonnie Glen. And this is data from March 21, and these numbers are continually being revised. Finally, just from MFE's point of view, they're working really hard to reduce waste, and they're being a lot more active in this space. Some of their key levers include the increases to the waste levy, increased ETS costs, and potential regulatory action. And that, I think the regulatory action could be quite significant in future, particularly if they follow through on the proposal for the organic material bans in landfill by 2030. And that will have a significant impact on the overall waste volumes going to landfill nationally. So just briefly on the waste levy, the progressive increase of the waste levy has already commenced, and it's going to keep going up until $60 a tonne from July 2024, and there is the potential for it to continue to rise after that point. The Ministry for the Environment hasn't yet released their guidance on how these funds will be spent, but at the moment local authorities receive 50% of that, which is distributed nationally on a population pro rata basis. So HDC is currently getting in the order of $120,000 a year back from that. In summary, waste minimisation is ramping up in terms of the central government action and the levers and incentives that are being put in place. HDC's waste per household is high and is reported to be increasing, not decreasing. However, I think better data will give a better picture of that. And if HDC's controlled waste can be minimised, this will reduce the impact of the higher waste charges on rates. A Section 17A review was carried out prior to the commencement of this process around the future of the Levine landfill. And the review concluded that the territorial authorities from the Horizons region should work together to develop a joint waste minimisation and management plan similar to those in the Wellington region. And that would identify the areas that would be best suited to joint procurement or delivery. In the short term, joint procurement for the refuse disposal was not practical. And in future, HDC should continue to outsource operations to a contractor, either directly or via CCTO, regardless of whether HDC's refuse is to be disposed of in the Levine landfill or elsewhere. And in terms of HDC's service provision, it's similar to the neighbouring local authorities in Horizons, and most of these local authorities only control a very small proportion of their district's waste. And HDC is the last landfill owning council in the lower part of the region. This just gives a picture of the landfills that are near Levine, and of particular note are Bonnie Glen, Spices and Silverstream, which are all approximately 80 to 90 kilometres away, and have varying remaining capacities, although there are a number of landfills near Levine, well, within 100 kilometres of Levine that still have sufficient space to take HDC's waste should the Levine landfill close. There's a number of barriers to entry in the landfill market which make it difficult for new entrants to open up a new landfill, including the time and uncertainty of the resource consent process and the control of the waste stream. So in terms of the options, the first option is to close the Levine landfill in 2022, and this assumes transport of council-controlled waste to an out-of-district location based on a long-term disposal contract. In terms of the future use of the Levine landfill, first of all, it will need to be capped and have full closure in place. Then light grazing or reserve would be allowed via the resource consents. Any other future activity would require new or amended consents. This option does provide a strong alignment to the waste WMP objectives, and that's because the majority of costs are variable and therefore there's greater savings associated with each tonne of waste that HDC can divert from landfill. It enables council to give the best effect to its community wellbeing obligations and provides a lower overall risk to HDC. The resource consent would still need to be reviewed at those set points and times and renewed in 2037 as there still would be discharge from the closed landfill. The landfill agreement would remain in place and the remaining parts would come into effect, including the closure plan and the reconciliation process. The leachate remediation, which is a separate resource consent requirement, will still require to be complete by 2023. Option 2 would see landfill operations continue until 2025, and the landfill could be managed either by council or via a CCTO. From 2026, the waste would need to be disposed of elsewhere, and this option would provide strong encouragement for waste minimisation after 2025. It would allow council to give effect to its community wellbeing obligations, particularly from 2025 onwards. And a range of waste volumes and gate rates have been modelled as part of the analysis. However, this option does provide the worst outcome financially due to the short time that the landfill would remain open. And this option provides less risk than option 3, but more than option 1. From a resource consent, landfill agreement and leachate remediation point of view, the option 2 and option 1 are identical in terms of the requirements. And then the final option, which is option 3, the landfill will continue to operate until 2037 or when it's full. And we have recommended that if council chooses this option, that they establish a council-controlled trading organisation. The financial outcome would be dependent on the volume and the price of waste secured, and this increases the financial risk to council. There would also be resource consent review risk starting in 2024, noting that the previous resource consent review process resulted in significant additional costs to council. HDC would have less incentive to minimise council-controlled waste, as this would impact the landfill finances. A larger component of the costs are fixed, and therefore there's less savings to be had from waste minimisation. It will create additional economic activity in the district, including jobs at the landfill, but does not provide a strong outcome in terms of the social, cultural and environmental well-beings, and provides a higher overall risk to HDC than options 1 and 2. I won't go into this in any detail, but we're recommending a relatively standard setup for the establishment of the CCTO, including a shareholders representative group to monitor the performance of them. There's a number of different ways it could be set up, but this is the way that we're recommending, and would see HDC providing equity and working capital and receiving dividends and interest from the CCTO. The operations contractor would be contracted through the CCTO, and it would be responsible for securing third-party waste. Finally, the landfill agreement would terminate under this option, and the parties would be free to take whatever action they saw fit. The resource consent review process would remain, and the consent will need to be renewed in 2037, either for future landfill operations or for the discharge from the closed landfill. And the leachate remediation, as with all options, will need to be done by 2023. I'll now pass over to Nick Robertson from Burl, who will go through the wellbeing assessment.
Thanks, Tessa, and thank you very much for the opportunity to speak this afternoon. So I'm just going to present a high-level summary, the benefit predominantly of the public, of the wellbeing assessment. As Tessa mentioned, some of the information in the wellbeing case is commercially sensitive, particularly in the economic wellbeing space. So some of this will be covered at a higher level than other parts of the presentation. So I'll start with a bit of an overview and introduction of wellbeing, then a description of each of the wellbeings, scoring of the wellbeing, some of the headlines from our report. Now some of these will be similar, some of the information here will be similar to that which Tessa has just presented on. So for the benefit of those who sort of haven't seen a wellbeing case before, wellbeing is about people and creating conditions to thrive across generations. The wellbeing case replaces the traditional economic case and assesses how the options will contribute to or detract from economic, social, cultural and environmental wellbeing. The wellbeing case presents the broader long-term impacts not captured by the strategic management, commercial and financial cases. Wellbeing doesn't have to be a number or measured directly, and often it can't. So the options here are assessed against the impact on selected outcomes. And the wellbeing consideration is required by the Local Government Act, which was reinserted in 2019. So in terms of measuring wellbeing, we developed the wellbeing framework you can see on the screen here. So this was developed following analysis of HDC's official documents, including long-term plans and other strategic documents. And then we engaged with a selection of stakeholders that were agreed between HDC officials and ourselves at Burl. This included representatives from community groups, local residents, iwi, and local businesses. And so this was particularly important in terms of the social, cultural, and environmental wellbeing. So the focus for these three wellbeings was predominantly on the area surrounding the landfill and the people that live in and around the landfill. As this is sort of more likely to impact them than it is people in Foxton or Shannon. So the framework sets out 3 outcomes for social, environmental and cultural wellbeing, and 4 for economic wellbeing, and each wellbeing has been given a weight of 25% to represent their equal wellbeing. The equal contribution to overall wellbeing. And then within each of the wellbeings themselves, that 25% is then divided across the outcomes that are sought. And these outcomes were decided in conjunction with the council and then were weighted based on their feedback. So the first wellbeing we look at in the report is social wellbeing. So social wellbeing involves individuals, families, whānau, hapu, iwi, and communities being able to set goals and achieve them, such as education, health, strength of the community, financial and personal security, equity of opportunity, and rights and freedoms. So the potential to maximise social wellbeing is greater the sooner the landfill is closed. And closure limits the volume of waste and odour, and this reduces the possible short and long-term impacts of the landfill on social wellbeing. So we had 3 outcomes here. The first being waste disposal supports healthy lifestyles. So this is minimising health problems for the Horowhenua community, while also minimising pollution of the local area and reducing instances of unsafe water. Outcome 2 was waste disposal creates a safe and supportive environment. That is waste disposal will support the community to feel safe and supported by building trust. Waste disposal will be transparent and honour commitments and complies with legal agreements and compliance regulations. Finally, waste disposal supports inclusive and connected communities. So waste disposal does not entrench existing inequalities. It will enable all members of the community to be included and connected, and it will uplift the Hokio community and support development. So in terms of social wellbeing, option 1 closing in 2022 had the highest score overall, with a total of 110 from a potential 125, with all of the options here for all of the outcomes here scoring highest in the closure in 2022 scenario. So some of the headlines from social wellbeing is ceasing disposal and closing the landfill and restoring the site would improve the lifestyles of local residents. Community members are scarred by the experience of the old dump and a concern that history will repeat. We'll touch on this a little bit further on when we come to environmental wellbeing. Parties to the landfill agreement want to see the landfill closed by December 2025, and as the Chief Executive did in recommending closure in 2022, this has allowed him to comply with the agreement. If the landfill was to remain open and grow past 2025, residents would be disappointed and lose further trust in HDC, and they would likely continue to fight any future expansion to the landfill past this period. Closing the landfill at any time would remove the mental barrier and physical barrier that currently exists between Hokio and Levine. This would improve the sense of connectivity for the Hokio community. Finally, a lot's been made about the potential of Hokio, and when you sort of look up and down the coast either side of Hokio, you sort of see very vibrant communities, and Hokio would like to see the same happening or something similar happening for their township. So economic wellbeing looks at whether the economy can generate the employment and wealth necessary to provide the requirements that make for wellbeing, such as health, financial security, and equity of opportunity. Closing in 2037 has a lower cost over the 15-year period we've assessed over. However, when loans outstanding at the end of the period to fund the required development for keeping the landfill open until 2037, closing in 2022 is more favourable. So economic wellbeing had 4 outcomes. The first being waste disposal creates and supports jobs and contributes to GDP in the Horowhenua District. Second being waste disposal is affordable for business and residents. So in terms of this, it also limits incidents of fly tipping. Waste disposal meets the future needs of the district, including population and business growth, and is sustainable long term. And finally, Horowhenua promotes waste reduction, recycling, energy conservation, and efficiency. So it will encourage the community to reduce waste and promote resource recovery. So in terms of the impact of these outcomes, we assessed that option 3, closing in 2037, contributes the most to GDP and jobs, and I will touch on that shortly in a second. In terms of affordability, we assessed option 1 would be the most affordable for businesses and residents based on the total cost, and then assessing the likely impacts on gate rates at the Levine transfer station. All options were scored equally for waste disposal meeting the future needs of the district, including population and business growth. This looked out to the end of 2037, and identified that all landfills would have the capacity to meet these needs. And then in terms of promoting waste reduction and efficiency, the 2022 option scored highest here, as there is a direct relationship between the volume of waste produced by the district and the cost of disposing of that waste. So some of the headlines here, as I mentioned, closure in 2037 provides the greatest impact, contributing 276 jobs, full-time equivalent jobs over the 15-year period, and generating just under 28 million of gross domestic product within the Horizons district. The reason for this additional employment is the extra work required to develop the landfill and continue to have it operating. Cost has three main components: a fixed cost that will be incurred regardless of when the landfill closes, variable costs that change depending on the option selected, and a capital loan repayment outstanding at the end of the assessment period. In the short term, we assess that costs at the LRRF, or the Levin Transfer Station, is unlikely to be impacted. However, this is not to say that costs won't increase. Obviously, being run by a commercial provider currently, this will still be the case when the landfill closes, and it will be on them to set the prices as they see fit. So to provide some context, the LRRF currently sits above the median for surrounding transfer stations and just below the average. Keeping the landfill open until 2037 would provide competition in the landfill market in both the Horowhenua District and the Horizons region. However, HDC, in terms of owning a landfill, may struggle to compete on price long term with the other competitors in the region. So a second lot of headlines here is all three options will increase the cost for residents and ratepayers. How costs are spread will ultimately be a decision for HDC, and whether this is done through rates, bag charges, transfer station gate fees, or a combination. So what we've done here in this table is sort of present an example for what the cost would be to current ratepayers, the current rating base, in terms of the average cost per year and what they would need to increase by. So assuming the population still remains next year as it is this year, the rating cost increase would be $58 excluding GST for closure in 2022 and $57 for closure in 2037. The increase doesn't include any potential offset from the landfill aftercare fund or repayments of capital loans outstanding in 2037. All options, as I mentioned, provide for the future needs of the district, and based on national and international experience, fly tipping is not expected to increase. However, initial instances of fly tipping may occur just in the early stages as people adapt to higher prices for waste. So environmental wellbeing considers whether the natural environment can sustainably support the activities that constitute healthy community life, such as air quality, fresh water, uncontaminated land, and control of pollution. And option one has the greatest impact on minimising the negative impacts of waste disposal on environmental wellbeing. Now, again, three outcomes here. First being waste disposal meets best practice for environmental management of landfills. That is, it meets all compliance regulations as well as any legal agreements. Waste disposal, second outcome being waste disposal does not further degrade Horowhenua's rivers, lakes and waterways. And that HDC will manage its waste disposal in a way that promotes and enhances Horowhenua's natural and built environment for current and future generations. Final outcome there is waste disposal will not compromise a sustainable environment, and initiatives will help the community protect natural resources, and waste disposal will limit contribution to emissions. So here, as you can see by the scoring, option one, closing in 2022, scores highest across each of those outcomes and has the highest environmental wellbeing total with 113 from a possible 125. So some of the headlines from environmental wellbeing, as Tess mentioned, there's no evidence that the modern landfill is currently causing environmental degradation of rivers, lakes and waterways. Although low, however, the risk of off-site movement of leachate and gas at the landfill is a higher risk than at a site that has the same engineering controls without natural containment. So this is put down to the finite life of landfill liners and the location on sand dunes, as well as the larger footprint of the landfill if it needed to grow. So this increases the risk, although small, to Horowhenua's natural environment, particularly looking out over a period, of sort of 150 to 200 years. When we talked about emissions and gas capture, alternative landfills closest to Levine all have superior gas capture. and when accounting for transport and disposing of waste, an alternative landfill would create less emissions than the Levine landfill would do at its current state, and also when accounting for future improvements to emissions. And finally, disposing of waste in an alternative landfill will minimise the risk of future environmental impacts to Horowhenua. However, it should be noted that it does shift the risk to the out-of-district landfill. And the final wellbeing we looked at was cultural wellbeing, and this considers shared beliefs, values, customs, behaviours and identities reflected through language, stories, visual and performing arts, ceremonies and heritage that make up our communities. So option 1 limits the volume of waste, as I've already said, and moving away from using the landfill site as a landfill will support restoration of cultural wellbeing. Option 2 would then delay the impact by 4 years. So again, the 3 outcomes here, Horowhenua supports cultural and traditional activities in the area surrounding the landfill. So essentially here, disposing of Horowhenua's waste maintains and enhances the traditions and connections to ancestral lands, waterways, waitapu and other taonga. Second outcome is waste disposal supports development and capacity building of local marae, hapu and iwi. And the third outcome being the landfill decision builds and enhances the relationship between HDC and tangata whenua. So in this, HDC takes a proactive approach to TDT o Waitangi and its principals and partners, and with tangata whenua to enable them to make decisions alongside HDC. So in terms of how these outcomes scored, the top outcome there, supporting cultural and traditional activities, scored highest for option 1, as did the landfill decision building and enhancing the relationship between HDC and tangata whenua. However, none of the options really supported development and capacity building of local marae, hapu and iwi, and therefore they were scored equally with 0. So a few of the cultural wellbeing headlines. So to promote and support cultural and traditional activities in the area, it's necessary to stop the perceived environmental degradation being caused by the landfill. Tangata whenua wish for the early closure of the landfill. iwi seek to work in positive relationships with HDC. Collaborating positively to enhance cultural values and alleviate negative effects would be beneficial, and closing the landfill would be a step towards this. Delaying the closure would delay the opportunity to rebuild these relationships, therefore limiting HDC's ability to support cultural and traditional activities in the area surrounding the landfill. If the landfill closure date is past 2025, time and resources will likely be diverted to efforts to prevent the landfill remaining open. And then finally, as I mentioned, the options don't explicitly provide opportunities for local marae, hapu and iwi. So finally, this brings us to the total wellbeing assessment. And as you can see on the slide here, the option that scored the highest was option 1, closing in 2022, which scored 384 from a possible 500. This was followed by option 2, which scored 281.5, and then option 3 was third with 209.5. Option 1 scored highest across all of the, or highest or equal high across all of the wellbeing indicators except for the contribution to GDP, which was scored highest for option 3. For the rest, so for social wellbeing, environmental wellbeing and cultural wellbeing, option 1 scored the highest across each of them. For economic wellbeing, option 1 and option 3 were scored equally with 76 from a possible 125. And this just reflects the balance between job creation and the sort of cost to ratepayers and residents, and as well as the impact on meeting future needs and then promoting waste recovery and recycling. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Nick. Now we'll just get Tessa to wind it up. Thank you.
So just the very final part is the financial assessment. And Stantec developed a net present value model covering the period from 2022 to 2036. This includes repayment of the historical and any new landfill debt. And the new landfill debt will cover things such as ongoing operations of the landfill and any closure and capping and aftercare projects. A wide range of costs were included in this model, as well as the direct disposal costs. And the input information was based on a combination of the current costs, where we had them, tendered prices where available, and in other instances through engineers' estimates by Stantec. Some of the input information is confidential, and therefore we're only showing the headline value. So this shows the base case assessment for the 14-year period, and that's the net present value over the 14 years. And as you can see, all three options have a negative NPV, and that means that this is a cost to council. Option 1 has the lowest NPV and is therefore the preferred option from a financial perspective in the base case. Option 3 has a slightly higher NPV, and in some scenarios that we've modelled, it would be the preferred option financially. However, there are risks around some of those scenarios. And all these figures include an allowance for a public recycling station in Levine, and that's because this has historically been part of the landfill operations contract. And so we had a look at a range of scenarios, and the purpose of this was to identify how sensitive the results were to some of the key assumptions that we had to make. So first of all, we looked at the impact of council-controlled waste increasing or decreasing depending on council's waste minimisation initiatives and population growth. And reducing council waste has a bigger impact on options 1 and 2 than on option 3. We then looked at changes to third-party tonnes and to the gate rate for those third-party tonnes. Obviously, this is quite a dynamic market in terms of what goes on with the market pricing and the changes to operators over time. And so looked at the risk around what would happen if those volumes were to go down and what the upside would be if those volumes were to go up. We also considered changes to the emissions trading scheme costs. And as I said earlier, the carbon price has doubled in the last 12 months and is forecast to continue increasing. So these can be quite significant costs. And as the gas capture at the Levine landfill is lower than at the surrounding landfills, it will have a bigger impact on the Levine landfill than it will on its competitors. We then looked at what would happen in terms of gas capture if the gas capture system was invested in to get it up to higher levels, and what impact that would have on the potential future pricing. And finally, we looked at the different rates of inflation and how that impacted the results. So just to show the impact on operating costs, the bars at the bottom show the status quo, and the status quo isn't an option that continues to be available to council. That includes ongoing disposal of carpety waste at the Levine landfill, but it's modelled just to show what would happen in future if the status quo was to continue. And as you can see, all three options represent about a $1.2 million additional cost per annum. Following on through from this, you'd need a rates impact in year 1 of 3% for option 1 or 2.8% for options 2 or 3. And that's a high level figure and would depend quite a lot depending on how council decided to recover the costs associated with the change in the Levine landfill future. Options 2 and 3 have a much longer impact on council because of the need to repay debt. And if we come over to this slide, you can see that the impact on borrowings over time, once again, the bars represent the status quo, and you can see that that's much higher than for any of these options because you'd need to construct additional cells to cope with all the extra waste. And as you can see, options 1 and 2, once the landfill closes, the debt is gradually paid off. And for option 3, it will be higher at the end of the assessment period, and that will be paid off over the subsequent 25 years. And finally, from the point of view of looking at HDC's overall borrowings and the debt limit, none of the options result in a substantial change to HDC's overall net borrowing position. And then just finally, the impact on transfer station fees has been discussed by Nick earlier. And currently the Levine transfer station fees are set independently by Midwest Disposals, and HDC has no control over these prices. And this would not change in any of the options presented. The current fees are approximately in the middle of the transfer station fees compared through this graph. And transport costs represent some of the difference between the different locations, but not all of the different locations. And a large and probably increasing proportion of these transfer station costs is represented by government fees and charges. So in summary, the landfill agreement places a number of responsibilities on HDC, including this review of the closure dates. The closure of the landfill provides the best alignment to HDC's waste minimisation objectives. The wellbeing assessment has concluded that economically, either options 1 or 3 would provide the best outcome, while from a social, cultural and environmental point of view, option 1 would provide the best outcome. The financial analysis concluded option 1 was the preferred option financially in most scenarios, with options 3 the preferred option financially in some of the other scenarios. The risk assessment concluded that there was substantially higher downside risk with options 2 and 3. And as a result, in our independent opinion, the recommended option is for closure of the Levine landfill in 2022. Thank you.
So that concludes the presentation by Morrison Solutions and Burl. What's in front of us now is that we need to move it to in committee so that any questions or clarifications around some of the commercially sensitive items in the business case can be answered or responded to. However, I am conscious that dinner is due to arrive in 10 minutes, and I think it might be an opportune time to adjourn the meeting now, because I think that there will be considerable time spent in the committee. Oh, okay. I've just been informed that it's been changed to 6:30. So in that case, we will proceed. Councillor Jennings.
Mr. Mayor, I have a procedural motion, and I'm happy to elaborate on that. I'd like to move that actually this report be left to sit on the table, and I'm more than happy to elaborate on why I believe that should occur.
Do I have a seconder for that? Councillor Bishop. So I've just been informed that that has to be put to the table immediately and that there will be no discussion on that. So I now will ask for a division on that. And I will start on my right. Councillor Deputy Mayor Mason. Against. Councillor Bishop for. Councillor Kay Simmons. Against. Councillor Isaacs.
Sorry, can I have some clarification, please?
Yes.
I was actually in a bit of a discussion. I did miss what we are going
So
to.
Councillor Jennings has moved that we leave this topic on the table and delay it.
For what amount of time do we know?
No, he's just asked that it be left on the table. It could take months, could take weeks.
Yeah. Your point of order takes precedence over a division.
We are voting. So the point of order is dismissed.
Can I please ask a question?
There's no discussion on the thing. We're putting the motion that the we delay the topic. Councillor Isaacs.
For.
Councillor Mitchell.
Against.
Councillor Kedu. Councillor Allen.
Against.
Councillor Tukapua.
Sorry, I don't understand why we don't discuss it.
Well, there's no point in discussing. You're either for delaying it or not delaying it.
Carry on.
So you're abstaining or against? Councillor Jennings. Councillor Brannigan.
For.
And I am against.
Mr. Mayor, now the vote has been put, it's perhaps important to just clarify that there cannot be a debate around procedural motions. I think maybe that might have been the uncertainty around the table, but I just seek verification from Mr. Rose that that's the case.
Thank you.
Yes, so procedural motions must be taken immediately and there is no debate or discussion. So that's four.
With one abstention. And just have 11. Must be 7. So council. The motion was lost 7-4. So I'll now move that the public be excluded, and the following motion is submitted for consideration: that the public be excluded from the following parts of the proceedings of this meeting: the general subject of each matter to be considered while the public is excluded, the reason for passing this resolution in relation to each matter, and the specific grounds under section 48(1) of the Local Government Official Information and Meetings Act 1987 for the passing of this resolution follows. This resolution is made in reliance on section 48(1)(a) of the Local Government Official Information and Meetings Act 1987 and the particular interest or interest protected by section 6 or section 7 of that act, which would be prejudiced by the holding of the whole or relevant part of the proceedings of the meeting in public, as follows: for the future of the Levine landfill. Reason for passing this resolution in relation to each matter: the public conduct of the part of this part of the meeting would likely result in the disclosure of information for which good reason for withholding exists under section 7. The particular interest protected under section 7(2)(h), the withholding of the information is necessary to enable the local authority to carry out without prejudice or disadvantage commercial activities, and the grounds under section 48(1) for the passing of this resolution: section 48(1)(a), the public conduct of the part of the meeting would likely to result in the disclosure of information for which good reason for withholding exists under section 7. I also have an additional recommendation that the Morrison Solutions presenters Malcolm Morrison and Tessa McGregor and Nick Robertson from Burl are permitted to remain at this meeting after the public has been excluded because of their knowledge of the Levine landfill business case and Burl social wellbeing report. This knowledge, which will be of assistance in relation to the matter to be discussed, is relevant to that matter because they researched and developed the business case and wellbeing report. I'm happy to move that. Could I have a seconder, please? Councillor Allen. All those in favour? Against?
Point of order. Is there no discussion? That's a procedural motion.
Against?
Yeah, against.
So the motion's carried. Just to put any fears at risk for those that are watching or out in the foyer or for the media, no decisions will be made while we are in committee. It is purely to allow elected members for clarification and questions around some of the commercially sensitive parts of the business case. We will turn live streaming off and we'll take a 5-minute break and resume shortly.